The encounter at the airport. It was a bustling morning at the airport, the kind of day where the air buzzed with excitement and anticipation. Travelers rushed through the terminal, dragging their suitcases behind them, while families gathered to bid farewell to loved ones. Among the crowd was a tall, poised black man named Marcus Johnson, known to many in the aviation world as Captain Marcus. He was a celebrated pilot with a remarkable career, having logged thousands of flight hours and earned numerous accolades for his skills and contributions to aviation safety. As Marcus walked through the terminal, he couldn't help but smile at the energy around him. He had just returned from a successful overseas flight and was looking forward to spending some quality time with his family. Dressed in a smart casual outfit, he exuded confidence and professionalism. Little did he know that this ordinary day would take an unexpected turn. Meanwhile, Officer Jake Thompson stood near the entrance of the terminal, scanning the crowd with a watchful eye. A seasoned cop with years of experience under his belt, Jake had developed a reputation for being tough on crime. However, his approach often bordered on aggressive, especially when it came to young black men whom he viewed with suspicion. Today was no different. He was on high alert, convinced that trouble was lurking somewhere within the throng of travelers. As Marcus made his way toward baggage claim, he noticed Officer Thompson's gaze lingering on him. The officer's posture stiffened as he observed Marcus walking confidently past him. In Jake's mind, there was something about Marcus that didn't sit right. Perhaps it was his calm demeanor or the way he carried himself that triggered an instinctual bias. Without any real justification, Officer Thompson decided to follow Marcus. He watched as Marcus retrieved his suitcase from the carousel and began to walk toward the exit. Suddenly, without warning or cause, Jake approached him. "Excuse me, sir," he said brusquely, blocking Marcus's path. Marcus paused, taken aback by the officer's abruptness. "Is there a problem, officer?" he asked politely, trying to gauge the situation. "You fit a description we've been given," Jake replied curtly, his voice lacking any warmth or understanding. "I need to ask you a few questions." Marcus felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He knew that this interaction had nothing to do with him personally. It was about assumptions and prejudices that plagued society. "I'm just returning from a flight," he explained calmly. "I'm Captain Marcus Johnson." Jake's expression remained unchanged. "I don't care who you are," he snapped back. "I need you to step aside for further questioning." The surrounding crowd began to take notice of the unfolding scene. Whispers spread like wildfire as people turned their heads to see what was happening. Some recognized Marcus from news articles or social media posts about his achievements in aviation. Others simply saw a black man being confronted by a police officer in an airport setting. Feeling a mix of anger and disbelief, Marcus complied, but remained composed. "You can check my ID," he said firmly, reaching into his pocket for his pilot's license and identification badge. As he handed over his credentials, Officer Thompson scrutinized them with an air of skepticism. "This could be fake," he muttered under his breath, though deep down he knew that it wasn't true. The badge shimmered under the fluorescent lights of the terminal, a symbol of respect and authority in the aviation industry. "Look," Marcus said, trying to maintain his dignity amidst this humiliating encounter. "I have nothing to hide. I'm here on official business." But Jake's mind was made up. He was determined to assert control over the situation, regardless of the facts presented before him. He radioed for backup, while keeping his eyes locked on Marcus, as if expecting him to make a sudden move. The tension in the air thickened as more passengers began to gather around them, some filming with their phones, while others exchanged concerned glances. The atmosphere shifted from one of casual travel excitement to one filled with uncertainty and unease. "Why are you doing this?" Marcus asked, frustration creeping into his voice. "You're making a scene out of nothing." Jake ignored him and continued to question him about his travel plans and destination, clearly more interested in maintaining his authority than listening to Marcus's explanations. As minutes ticked by like hours, Marcus felt trapped, not just by Officer Thompson's aggressive demeanor, but by an entire system that often failed people like him. He thought about how many times he had faced similar situations throughout his life, being judged not by who he was, but by how others perceived him based on the color of his skin. Just when it seemed like things couldn't get any worse for Marcus, an unexpected voice broke through the tension. "Officer, is there an issue here?" A woman stepped forward from the crowd, an airline representative who recognized Marcus immediately. She had seen him pilot flights before and knew firsthand about his reputation as a skilled aviator and respected leader in aviation safety. "Captain Johnson, what's going on?" she asked with genuine concern. The sight of someone who knew him seemed to momentarily rattle Officer Thompson's composure. But before anything could be resolved, another officer arrived at the scene, this one more seasoned and aware of racial dynamics than Jake. As they exchanged glances and began assessing the situation further, Marcus felt a flicker of hope amidst this chaotic encounter. A hope that perhaps justice would prevail and that understanding might finally break through ignorance. Little did they all know that this incident would soon lead to revelations that would challenge perceptions and spark conversations far beyond this airport terminal. The incident unfolds. The atmosphere in the airport terminal was charged with tension as the airline representative, Sarah, stepped forward to intervene. Her presence brought a momentary pause to the escalating situation. She was well respected within the airline community, known for her dedication to customer service and her commitment to promoting diversity and inclusion in aviation. Seeing Marcus in distress triggered her instinct to act. "Officer, I believe there's been a misunderstanding," Sarah said, her voice steady yet firm. "This is Captain Marcus Johnson, an esteemed pilot with our airline. He just returned from an international flight." Jake Thompson's expression shifted slightly, but his posture remained rigid. "I still need to verify his identity," he insisted, unwilling to back down. He looked at Marcus with a mix of suspicion and defiance, as if the badge he wore granted him immunity from reason. Marcus felt a wave of frustration wash over him. He had spent years working hard to earn respect in an industry that often overlooked people like him. Now, standing in front of a crowd that was growing increasingly curious and concerned, he felt his dignity slipping away. "Look," Marcus said, trying to keep his voice calm despite the rising anger within him. "I understand that you're just doing your job, officer, but I assure you, I'm not a criminal. I'm a pilot who has dedicated my life to flying safely and responsibly." Sarah nodded in support. "He's not just any pilot. He's a role model for many in our community. We need to treat this situation with respect." At that moment, another officer arrived, a seasoned veteran named Officer Daniels, who had seen his fair share of misunderstandings, fueled by bias. He surveyed the scene quickly, taking in the anxious crowd and the palpable tension between Jake and Marcus. "What's going on here?" Officer Daniels asked as he approached them. Jake opened his mouth to explain, but was interrupted by Sarah. "Officer Daniels, this is Captain Marcus Johnson. He was just detained by Officer Thompson under false pretenses." Daniels raised an eyebrow at Jake, sensing the discomfort radiating from both Marcus and Sarah. "Is that true?" he asked Jake directly. "He fits a description," Jake replied defensively, though his tone lacked conviction. "Fits a description?" Daniels echoed incredulously. "You know better than to act on assumptions without solid evidence." He turned to Marcus, his demeanor shifting to one of professionalism and respect. "Captain Johnson, I apologize for this inconvenience. Can you please show me your identification again?" Marcus handed over his credentials once more, feeling a mix of relief and lingering frustration as Officer Daniels examined them closely. The crowd watched intently. Some had begun recording the incident on their phones, while others whispered among themselves. As Daniels verified Marcus's identity through a quick call to dispatch, Jake stood off to the side, visibly uncomfortable with how quickly the situation had escalated beyond his control. The reality of racial profiling was dawning on him. This wasn't just about procedure. It was about human dignity. "Captain Johnson," Daniels said after confirming Marcus's credentials over the radio, "I appreciate your patience during this unfortunate situation." He turned toward Jake with a stern look. "This isn't how we handle things. We need to do better." The weight of those words hung heavily in the air as Jake shifted uncomfortably on his feet. He had always prided himself on being tough, but now realized that toughness could sometimes translate into insensitivity, a lesson that would linger long after this encounter. "Thank you," Marcus replied quietly but firmly, grateful for Officer Daniels' intervention, yet still feeling the sting of humiliation from being wrongfully accused in front of so many strangers. As the crowd began to disperse, some still murmuring about what they had witnessed, Sarah offered Marcus a sympathetic smile. "I'm so sorry you had to go through this," she said softly. "It's unacceptable." Marcus nodded appreciatively, but couldn't shake off the feeling of anger simmering beneath the surface. "It happens more often than people realize," he said quietly, reflecting on how many times he had faced similar situations throughout his life. Not just as a pilot, but as a black man navigating spaces where he often felt unwelcome or judged. "Let's get you out of here," Sarah suggested gently, sensing his discomfort lingering even after the confrontation had ended. As they walked toward baggage claim together, Marcus couldn't help but think about how this incident would resonate far beyond this airport terminal. It wasn't just about him. It was about all those who had faced similar prejudices, those whose stories often went unheard or unnoticed. Meanwhile, Officer Thompson stood off to the side, grappling with his own thoughts as he watched them leave. The encounter had shaken him more than he cared to admit. It forced him to confront biases he had long ignored or justified under the guise of duty. In the days that followed, news of the incident spread like wildfire across social media platforms and local news outlets. Videos captured by witnesses circulated widely, sparking conversations about racial profiling and police conduct in public spaces. Marcus found himself at the center of these discussions, not just as a victim, but as an advocate for change. He began receiving messages from supporters who shared their own experiences of discrimination and bias within various sectors of society. Feeling empowered by this newfound support, Marcus decided it was time to speak out publicly about what had happened at the airport that day, not only for himself, but for everyone who had ever felt marginalized or unjustly treated because of their race. He organized a press conference where he shared his story candidly and called for awareness around racial profiling in law enforcement practices. His words resonated deeply with many who attended or viewed it online. They echoed sentiments of frustration mixed with hope for change. "I stand here today not just as Captain Marcus Johnson, but as someone who believes in justice and equality for all," he declared passionately before an audience filled with reporters and supporters alike. "We must confront these biases head-on if we want our society to move forward together." As he spoke out against injustice and advocated for systemic change within law enforcement practices across communities nationwide, Marcus knew that this was only the beginning, a stepping stone toward creating a world where everyone could feel safe, regardless of their race or background. The journey ahead would be challenging. There would be obstacles along the way, but armed with determination fueled by solidarity from those around him, Captain Marcus Johnson was ready to take flight once more. This time not just as a pilot soaring through skies, but as an advocate leading others toward brighter horizons. The revelation. The press conference was a turning point for Marcus Johnson. As he stood before the cameras and microphones, he felt a mix of anxiety and determination. This was more than just a moment to share his story. It was an opportunity to raise awareness about the issues of racial profiling and discrimination that plagued not only law enforcement, but society as a whole. "Thank you all for being here today," Marcus began, his voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "What happened to me at the airport is not an isolated incident. It's a reflection of a larger problem that affects countless individuals every day." He spoke passionately about his experiences as a black pilot in an industry that often overlooked diversity. He recounted how, despite his achievements, he had faced skepticism and bias throughout his career. "I've been in situations where my qualifications were questioned simply because of the color of my skin," he said, his eyes scanning the audience filled with reporters, activists, and supporters. As he shared his story, Marcus could see the impact of his words on those listening. Some nodded in agreement, while others looked on with expressions of concern and empathy. He highlighted the importance of understanding and addressing biases within law enforcement, urging officers to undergo training that emphasized cultural sensitivity and awareness. "Racial profiling is not just an issue for those who are targeted, it's an issue for all of us," he continued. "When we allow assumptions to dictate our actions, we undermine the very fabric of our society. We must strive for justice and equality for everyone." The press conference garnered significant media attention, with coverage spreading across local news channels and social media platforms. Supporters began to rally around Marcus, sharing their own stories of discrimination and calling for change in policing practices. Hashtags like #Justice for Marcus and #End Racial Profiling trended on Twitter, amplifying the conversation nationwide. As the days passed, Marcus found himself invited to various forums and discussions where he could share his insights and advocate for reform. He participated in community events aimed at bridging gaps between law enforcement and marginalized communities, emphasizing the need for dialogue and understanding. Meanwhile, Officer Jake Thompson faced a different kind of reckoning. The fallout from the incident weighed heavily on him as he watched the media coverage unfold. Initially defensive about his actions, he began to reflect on Marcus's words and the broader implications of what had transpired at the airport. In conversations with fellow officers, Jake started to realize how deeply ingrained biases could influence behavior, even unintentionally. He began attending workshops focused on implicit bias training, seeking to understand how societal stereotypes shaped perceptions and actions within policing. "I want to do better," Jake confided during one session with his colleagues. "I never intended to hurt anyone or make them feel less than they are. I need to learn how to approach situations differently." While Jake's journey toward self-awareness was fraught with discomfort, it marked a crucial step toward personal growth and accountability. He reached out to Marcus through social media, expressing a desire to meet and discuss their experiences openly. To Jake's surprise, Marcus agreed to meet him at a local cafe, a decision that took courage from both men. As they sat across from each other, an air of tension lingered initially. However, it soon gave way to a candid conversation about their respective journeys. "I appreciate you reaching out," Marcus said sincerely. "It takes humility to admit when we're wrong." Jake nodded earnestly. "I've been reflecting on my actions that day," he replied. "I realize now how my assumptions clouded my judgment. I'm sorry for what you went through." Marcus listened intently as Jake shared his perspective, how years on the force had shaped his views, but also how he was beginning to understand the importance of empathy in policing. "I want to be part of the solution," Jake continued earnestly. "How can I help?" Marcus felt a flicker of hope as they discussed ways they could work together to foster understanding between law enforcement and communities of color. They brainstormed ideas for community outreach programs that could promote dialogue and education around racial bias. "Maybe we can organize joint workshops where officers can hear firsthand accounts from people affected by profiling," Marcus suggested. "It's important for everyone involved to see each other as human beings rather than stereotypes." As their conversation deepened, both men realized that healing would take time, but was possible through honest dialogue and collaboration. They agreed to stay in touch and explore opportunities for partnership moving forward. Meanwhile, Marcus continued his advocacy work, speaking at schools and community centers about his experiences as a pilot and the importance of diversity in aviation. He inspired young people from underrepresented backgrounds to pursue careers in fields where they were often overlooked. "I want you all to know that your dreams are valid," he told students during one presentation at a local high school. "Don't let anyone tell you that you can't achieve something because of who you are or where you come from." His words resonated deeply with many students who had faced similar challenges in their own lives, barriers imposed by societal expectations or biases that made them feel like outsiders in their chosen fields. As Marcus's advocacy gained momentum, he caught the attention of organizations dedicated to promoting diversity within aviation. They invited him to participate in panels discussing representation in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics fields, a passion project for him. Through these engagements, Marcus connected with other professionals who shared similar goals, increasing visibility for minorities in aviation, while working towards systemic change within industries historically dominated by white males. The momentum continued building as more people joined the movement advocating against racial profiling, individuals from all walks of life coming together united by a common goal, creating safer spaces for everyone regardless of race or background. As months passed since that fateful day at the airport, both Marcus Johnson and Jake Thompson found themselves transformed by their experiences, each learning valuable lessons about empathy, understanding, accountability, and ultimately striving toward building bridges instead of walls between communities divided by fear or misunderstanding. Their journey wasn't over yet. There would still be challenges ahead, but together they were determined not only to confront those challenges head-on, but also inspire others along the way. The community comes together. As the months rolled on, the movement sparked by Marcus Johnson's experience at the airport continued to gain traction. Community leaders, activists, and everyday citizens began to unite under the shared goal of addressing racial profiling and promoting equity in law enforcement. Marcus found himself at the forefront of this movement, leading discussions and initiatives that sought to create lasting change. One of the most impactful initiatives was a community forum titled Bridging the Gap. Understanding Racial Bias in Policing. The event was designed to foster open dialogue between law enforcement officers and community members affected by profiling. With Marcus as a keynote speaker, the forum aimed to create a safe space for sharing experiences and building mutual understanding. The day of the forum arrived, and excitement buzzed in the air. The venue, a local community center, was filled with chairs arranged in a large circle, symbolizing openness and equality. Attendees included police officers, community activists, educators, and residents from diverse backgrounds. As people filtered in, conversations erupted, with individuals eager to share their stories and listen to others. Marcus stood at the front of the room, feeling a mix of anticipation and responsibility. He understood that this was not just another event. It was an opportunity for healing and transformation. As he looked out at the crowd, he saw familiar faces, friends, supporters, and even Officer Jake Thompson, who had committed to attending and participating in the discussions. "Thank you all for being here today," Marcus began, his voice resonating with sincerity. "We're here to have an honest conversation about racial bias in policing, how it affects our communities, and what we can do together to create change." He shared his own story, the incident at the airport that had ignited this movement, and spoke about the importance of empathy and understanding. "We must acknowledge our differences but also recognize our shared humanity," he urged. "Only then can we work toward solutions that benefit everyone." After Marcus's introduction, a panel of speakers took their places. Community leaders who had experienced profiling firsthand, police officers willing to share their perspectives, and educators who could speak to the impact of these issues on young people. The panelists represented a range of experiences and viewpoints, setting the stage for a rich dialogue. The discussion began with questions from the audience. One young woman stood up, her voice trembling slightly as she spoke. "I've been stopped by police multiple times for no reason," she said. "It's terrifying. How can we trust law enforcement when we feel targeted?" A police officer responded thoughtfully. "I understand your fear," he said. "It's crucial for us as officers to listen and learn from your experiences. We need to do better at building trust within our communities." The conversation flowed naturally as attendees shared their stories, some heartbreaking, others empowering. A mother recounted how her son had been racially profiled while walking home from school. A retired officer spoke candidly about his regrets over past actions that contributed to distrust between police and communities of color. As discussions unfolded, Marcus facilitated dialogue between panelists and audience members, encouraging respectful exchanges that highlighted common ground while addressing difficult truths. He emphasized that acknowledging mistakes was essential for growth, both for individuals and institutions. "Change starts with us," he reminded everyone. "We must hold ourselves accountable while also pushing for systemic reforms within law enforcement." The forum concluded with actionable steps participants could take moving forward: forming community advisory boards that included diverse voices in policing decisions, advocating for implicit bias training for officers, and creating mentorship programs connecting youth with positive role models in law enforcement. As attendees left the community center that day, there was a palpable sense of hope in the air, a belief that together they could make a difference. In the weeks following the forum, Marcus continued his advocacy work alongside Officer Jake Thompson. They collaborated on initiatives aimed at improving relations between police departments and communities affected by profiling. Their partnership became a powerful symbol of reconciliation, two individuals from different backgrounds coming together to address a shared challenge. One initiative they launched was called Community Connect, a series of workshops designed to foster dialogue between police, officers, and residents in various neighborhoods. Each session included discussions about experiences with law enforcement, cultural sensitivity training for officers, and collaborative problem-solving exercises. During these workshops, participants engaged in role-playing scenarios where they could step into each other's shoes, officers experiencing what it felt like to be treated with suspicion, while community members navigated situations from an officer's perspective. The workshops proved transformative for many involved. Barriers began to break down as individuals realized they weren't so different after all. They laughed together over shared stories, while also confronting uncomfortable truths about bias and assumptions. As word spread about these workshops through social media platforms and local news outlets, attendance grew exponentially, people eager to participate in conversations that mattered deeply to them. Meanwhile, Marcus received invitations from schools across the region, asking him to speak about his experiences as both a pilot and an advocate against racial profiling. He embraced these opportunities wholeheartedly. Each time he spoke before students or faculty members brought him closer toward achieving his goal of inspiring future generations. In one particularly memorable session at a high school auditorium filled with eager faces, Marcus encouraged students not only to dream big, but also to be agents of change within their communities. "Your voice matters," he told them passionately. "You have the power to challenge injustice wherever you see it, whether it's in your school hallways or beyond." As applause erupted throughout the room after his speech concluded, a wave of energy surged through him, knowing he was making an impact on young minds readying themselves for tomorrow's challenges ahead. However, just as things seemed promising on many fronts, the reality remained stark. Systemic change would take time. Efforts needed sustained commitment from all involved parties if true progress were ever going to be realized. Months turned into years as Marcus continued championing these causes alongside allies like Officer Thompson, Each step forward met with new challenges requiring perseverance amid setbacks, but they remained undeterred by obstacles along their path toward justice. Ultimately, their journey wasn't just about one incident or two individuals. It represented something much larger, a collective movement striving toward equity, where everyone could feel safe, regardless of race or background. A vision rooted deeply within hope, fueled by unity among diverse communities working together toward common goals. The path forward. As the years passed, the movement sparked by Marcus Johnson's experience at the airport continued to evolve. The initiatives he had championed alongside Officer Jake Thompson began to bear fruit, fostering a renewed sense of community and understanding in their city. However, the journey was far from over. Marcus knew that real change required ongoing commitment, education, and advocacy. One of the most significant developments during this time was the establishment of the Unity and Diversity program, which aimed to promote cultural awareness and sensitivity within schools and law enforcement agencies. The program was designed to educate students about different cultures, while also training officers on how to engage with diverse communities respectfully and effectively. Marcus worked tirelessly to develop curriculum materials for the program, drawing on his own experiences and those of others who had faced discrimination. He collaborated with educators, community leaders, and law enforcement officials to create workshops that would be engaging and impactful. The first workshop was held at a local high school, where students eagerly gathered in the auditorium. As Marcus stood before them, he felt a sense of purpose wash over him. "Today, we're going to explore what it means to embrace diversity," he began. "We'll share stories, learn from one another, and discuss how we can create a more inclusive environment for everyone." The students participated in interactive activities designed to foster empathy and understanding. They engaged in discussions about their own backgrounds and experiences, sharing both challenges and triumphs. As they listened to one another, they began to recognize the common threads that connected them despite their differences. One student shared her story of being bullied for wearing a hijab, while another spoke about his struggles as an immigrant, adjusting to a new culture. As they opened up, a sense of camaraderie developed among them, an understanding that they were all navigating their own unique journeys. Meanwhile, Officer Thompson participated in parallel training sessions with fellow officers focused on implicit bias and community engagement strategies. He shared his own experiences from the airport incident as a cautionary tale about the consequences of assumptions based on race. "I've learned that our perceptions can cloud our judgment," he told his colleagues during one session. "It's essential that we approach every interaction with an open mind and heart." The workshops proved transformative for both students and officers alike. Feedback from participants highlighted how these sessions had shifted their perspectives. Students felt empowered to speak out against injustice, while officers gained valuable insights into the communities they served. As word spread about the success of the Unity and Diversity program, other schools and police departments across the region expressed interest in implementing similar initiatives. Marcus's vision was becoming a reality. He was witnessing firsthand how education could bridge divides and foster understanding. However, amidst these successes, challenges remained. The national conversation around policing and racial equity continued to evolve, often fueled by high-profile incidents that reignited public outrage. Marcus found himself increasingly called upon to speak at forums addressing these issues on a broader scale. During one such event, a national conference on police community relations, Marcus took the stage before an audience filled with activists, policymakers, and law enforcement leaders. He felt a mix of nerves and excitement as he prepared to share his story once more. "Thank you for having me here today," he began earnestly. "I stand before you not just as Captain Marcus Johnson, but as someone who believes deeply in our collective responsibility to create safer communities for everyone." He recounted his experience at the airport, the initial confrontation with Officer Thompson, and how it had sparked a movement for change that transcended individual encounters. This isn't just about one incident. It's about acknowledging systemic issues that affect so many people, he emphasized, as he spoke passionately about the need for accountability within law enforcement agencies and the importance of community engagement efforts like unity and diversity. He could feel the energy in the room shift. Attendees nodded along, some even rising to their feet in applause as he concluded his remarks. Afterward, Marcus participated in panel discussions alongside influential figures advocating for criminal justice reform. They exchanged ideas on how best to address systemic racism within policing, while highlighting successful initiatives from various communities across the country. Throughout these discussions, Marcus remained hopeful yet realistic about the challenges ahead. He understood that change wouldn't happen overnight. It required sustained effort from individuals committed to making a difference. Back home, Marcus continued his advocacy work while balancing his responsibilities as a pilot, flying passengers safely through the skies by day, while championing social justice by night. His dual roles became emblematic of his belief that one could pursue their passions while also fighting for what is right. As time went on, Marcus began mentoring young people interested in aviation, sharing not only his knowledge of flying, but also lessons about resilience in facing adversity. He wanted them to know that they could achieve their dreams regardless of societal barriers or biases they might encounter along the way. "Your journey may not always be easy," he told them during one mentoring session at a local aviation camp. "But remember, every challenge is an opportunity for growth." The impact of Marcus's mentorship rippled through the community as more young people pursued careers in aviation, breaking down barriers that had long existed within the industry. Meanwhile, Officer Thompson continued working diligently within his department, advocating for policy changes aimed at improving community relations and reducing instances of racial profiling. He became known among his colleagues as someone who prioritized empathy over authority, a shift that resonated positively throughout their precinct. Together, Marcus Johnson and Jake Thompson embodied hope amid ongoing struggles against systemic racism. They were living proof that change was possible when individuals chose understanding over division. As they reflected on their journeys together during casual meetups over coffee or lunch breaks, they often discussed future plans, expanding outreach efforts further into neighboring communities or collaborating with other organizations dedicated to social justice initiatives. One afternoon, while sitting outside at their favorite cafe, a thought struck Marcus suddenly. What if we could create a national network connecting pilots like me with law enforcement officers across different regions? A platform where we could share resources aimed at fostering collaboration between aviation professionals committed to diversity? Jake's eyes lit up at this idea, a spark igniting between them once again as they brainstormed ways this network could empower individuals nationwide while promoting positive relationships across sectors traditionally viewed as separate entities. With renewed energy fueling their conversations, their vision began taking shape, developing programs focused on mentorship opportunities between aspiring aviators from diverse backgrounds paired with police departments eager for change, creating pathways toward understanding through shared experiences within both fields. As plans unfolded over subsequent months, their partnership grew stronger than ever before, a testament not only to personal growth, but also collective action, driving meaningful transformations throughout society at large. Ultimately, their story wasn't just about overcoming adversity. It represented hope, a reminder that together, individuals from all walks of life could unite against injustice while striving toward brighter futures filled with possibility.